I'm Elaine Armstrong. I am a resident of Gallia County in Ohio, and I am a retired college administrator. The local university here, University of Rio Grande, I was the dean of students. What I do is in my free time, and have done it for probably approximately 30 years, is collect Black history. Fascinated with it, my people, and keeping the history and the pride and our origins going. My dad was from Mississippi, which was one of the most difficult states in the Union for people of color. He was born in the 20s, and he's deceased now, but he taught me a lot. He told me a lot of things that he had gone through, and that encouraged me or excited me, not to any particular level at the time. It was just words that he told me. But for example, when he was a child growing up in Mississippi, you could not go to school unless you were light enough to show a blue vein. Had to be able to show a blue vein to be able to go. And I was fascinated with that. Or the other one was the brown paper sack rule. Yeah, same thing, blue vein rules, brown paper sack. And so he came through during that time in a place where it was very difficult. And then as I, grew and just listened to him, I was walking along with I always did like antiques. And I was walking along with my uncle and my aunt, he was a collector of knives. And this particular place, we had gone to flea market. There was a can there. And matter of fact, it's right here, this can. And it was a tobacco can. And it had the name, or the brand name on it, was Nigger Hair. And I was floored. This was probably back in the 70s. I was floored by that. I'd never dreamed I'd see anything like that. And I couldn't afford it at the time, but I never forgot it. And so what I did was just started with things that I could afford. Postcards, all of those things that were stereotypical of how we were perceived. And sometimes how we perceived ourselves as well. And so that's how I started. And that was back in the 70s. And to this day, I still collect Black history. The things that I'm fascinated most with are slave artifacts, freedom papers, the shackles, advertisements of all types, whether it was on a cereal box or a receipt, because I think it really does. It's how we still, in 2017, perceive ourselves in many cases. And that's basically how I got started. We're very rural in Appalachia. We're located right along the Ohio River. And Ohio bordered slave states, Kentucky and West Virginia, what is now West Virginia, but at that time was Virginia. So as far back as slavery, when I can just imagine, we're only 10 miles probably right now from the river. Those people, if I can just get over there, meaning Ohio, I'll be free. So there were runaways. People were sold up and down the river, even though Ohio was a free state. But it was not a welcoming state. So when people did arrive here, it was not a welcoming state. You weren't a slave here, but you couldn't stay. For example, there were black codes and black laws. Ohio had black laws, which I think came about. Ohio became a state in 1803. By 1807, if not before 1807, they had black laws. You could not settle here. Gallia County or any county in the state, this was legislated through the state, that you could not settle here unless you had $200 per person. You had to register with the courthouse. Who's with you? How many of you are there? So those people that did come in, kind of, that Underground Railroad type thing. So these communities, these small communities developed. Buck Ridge is one. And there's people here today that are from that. And I've often wondered where they came in with, blacks were always referred to as bucks, whether they meant the deer, a buck deer, or whether it was but it was Buck Ridge, okay, a black settlement community. And these communities did have black schools. Morgan Township, one of the leaders here for this emancipation celebration, his ancestors were set free and brought to Morgan Township in Gallia County. So there's little burgs and little starts, all of which, or most of which, were in the very rural, very hilly, very woody areas. Don't know how many of us there are, or how long we're going to be here. But, so I imagine they probably had designated people to go shopping for sugar and lard and flour and so forth like that. That would be right immediately after slavery. Then, of course, the Jim Crow laws, because the black laws stayed in effect till like 1887 before they were finally outlawed. And I've always wondered why people continued on. Why didn't they just stay here? Why did people go on toward Canada? Well, there were free states, a lot of free states, but they weren't welcoming states. Like Ohio, you couldn't be unemployed, but at the same time, there were limits to who you could hire, what kind of work you could do. You couldn't sell them a gun. It was very, very difficult. And so we basically subsisted on our own. Then when you got into the 30s and 40s, the black codes, all of that existed. Theaters were separate, restaurants, and it's kind of, I don't know whether it's passed down, innate, not to go there, not to do this. For example, the swimming pool in the 50s and in the 1950s. I was born in 46. So in the 1950s, the swimming pool was segregated, and you could go swimming one day per week. That was on Wednesday. That's when they changed the water. Okay. And here, well, equal to our Kings Island, that's the big park for Ohio where everybody goes for entertainment now. But when we were kids, back in the 50s and 60s, it was Camden Park. And that was in Huntington, West Virginia, which is about 40 miles from here. That would be a big trip, but you were allowed to go there. Camden Park was, your usual, but they were open almost year-round. But I can remember in the 50s, we moved here to Ohio in around 1955. That was a big thing in the tri-state. Tri-state was Ohio, Kentucky, West Virginia, where they would get together, caravans of cars would there'd be a fleet, looked like a train of cars and station wagons. Everyone is going to Camden Park. One day per year. It was called Colored Day. And that was the first Monday in August. And before they integrated, one day per year, you could go to Camden Park. And amusement park. And so that was the same as Christmas. Now I wouldn't go now for nothing, but at that time, and just being a kid, and yeah, 1 day per year. My dad was in the Navy, so before we moved here in the 1950s, mid 50s, I was in California with my dad was in the Navy, but his wife was originally from here, and right here in Gallia County. So her sister and her both lived in California. Their husbands were in the Navy. My stepmother's sister, her husband, my stepmother was very fair complected, as light as you, or even more fair than you are. And but they were black, but he was dark. Her husband was dark complected, and when they would come from California to Ohio, which at that time was a 5-day trip, he would put on a chauffeur's cap, and she would sit in the back. And actually, it was his wife. That was her husband, just to get through the territory, so to speak, to get home, to get here. My uncle, another uncle, they lived another part of Ohio, near Columbus. He was a barber in the 50s, and we, as kids, we always thought they were rich because they had a really nice home, and he wore a white shirt and a tie every day to work, and a business hat, and we thought they were wealthy. But he could not, and he cut hair all day. They owned their shop. Him and his brothers owned their own barber shop, but they couldn't cut black hair, even though they were black, because all the whites wouldn't come. There wouldn't be enough blacks to keep you in business, and so he would have to cut the hair of the people of his own race at home. He would have to wait, and they'd have to come to his home in the evening to cut their hair. I think they're alive and well in any community, even your major cities, whether it be Columbus or Louisville, Kentucky, or whatever. Right now, politically, socially, you see it. It's not something new. Matter of fact, I think that it's easier now to actually be a member of something like that, because you can be indoctrinated in the confines of your own bedroom or living room. If you have the internet, you don't have to go out and look silly. I can get you indoctrinated just online. So I think it's scary. It never really went anywhere. In 1993, I was working at the college, less than a mile from here, but in 1993 there was a rally, a Klan rally in Gallipolis, the county seat, which is 6-7 miles from here, on the courthouse steps. They filed for, we'd like to have a rally and try and get people to join and whatever. And I thought, it can't be this, surely this can't be. But I went into the city commission and talked to them, and they said yes, that they had made application to, and we can't prevent them. Well, they have, freedom of speech too. So what we did was just more or less got together as a community with other people that were like-minded with us, black and white, and had an alternative event, occasion to get together, sing, talk, whatever, while that was going on, to take away from that. And but they did. Matter of fact, if you remind me when we finish talking, I'll show you some pictures from that very event, and that was 1993. And then, of course, there weren't that many people. We talked and went around to different places, and so people basically stayed away. There might have been maybe 30 or 40 people at that event, and they were basically trying to recruit. Then, let me see, that was in 93. probably about 2 years ago, people were getting little Ziploc bags that had been tossed in their yard all over Gallipolis, and there would be like application to join the encouragement to join the KKK. There'd be a mint in there, piece of candy, and then an application, and it seemed like there was something else in there, but I can't even remember. But they didn't even know, and they would just drive down the street evidently and throw them in different yards. And so some of the people just threw them away. Some took them to the police, and anyway, as word got out about it, I went into the police department to see, do you have any of those? And so one of the policemen, he had 2 or 3 where people, so he gave them to me. I didn't bring them today, but he gave them to me. He said, yeah, here's the, and it was amazing because some of the yards they threw them in, they were black, but you know, you do that stuff in the cover of night, so you don't know where you are. You hope you know. But now that was 2 years ago. So it's more or less everywhere, and you're seeing it now politically. And it never really went anywhere. It just gets quiet for a while, but they're there, and they're working as hard as ever. And so you basically have to just be on your toes and aware all the time of those elements. It was always a special time.
Can you say Emancipation Celebration was that way?
Yeah, Emancipation Celebration was always a special time for us. It wasn't like it is now where they've got vendors and this and that, and it was more integrated. It wasn't. It was primarily blacks. Whites were always welcome to come, but it was a celebration of freedom, and it was homecoming. So, you know, some of the things you see now, some of the people that you see, that it would be a homecoming for just people that had lived here, went away, come back, and then of course celebration of being free. But when I was a kid, it was only one day. Prior to my time, which would be, my earliest remembrances were in the 50s, 1950s. It was always, no matter what day of the week it fell on. September 22nd, which is when Lincoln signed the Emancipation, went into effect on January 1st, 1863. But when he signed it in September 22nd, they, no matter what day that fell on, people would take off from work. It was just that big of an occasion. It was a special day. Many people, from what I've heard, have lost their jobs because they were told, you better be here. You know, they lost their jobs because they went and celebrated. It was only one day, but it was always special. That was the only place where you could you had a queen. You nominated a queen. It was somebody black. And, you know, because you weren't going to be recognized in the larger community, in our schools. In the 1950s, it was a big day. They generally would have speakers from major speakers, whether they were political or religious leaders from around the state. They took it a lot more serious than we do, I think, now. But it would be, like I said, a one-day occasion, but there would be, from what I've read in some of the historic papers that they have here, that there would be thousands of people that came. You know, it's not like now, you know, you go to school, you graduate, you can move away, there's opportunities, you can do just about and go anywhere you choose. Well, that wasn't necessarily the case. The communities here were sectioned.
Hello.
Hi.
Good to see you.
And were just sectioned certain places for minorities, whether it was Morgan or Gallipolis or Bidwell or Buck Ridge, but they were those communities were very close, very tight. Black Fork was another one, which is near Ironton, which is probably about 40 miles from here, but still, they were black communities who were very close, and one community supported the other one. So one big church day might bring people from all of those communities, even though, you know, you didn't get to see each other that often. You didn't, you know. So those were big occasions, and the Emancipation celebration was always almost equal to Christmas. Like I said, that's where you could have a queen. You could really take pride in those that had excelled academically. You got the recognition, and so, you know, it was wonderful. Get up early. It was a very rural area where they had, they called it a park, but I mean it was just basically trees and grass. But we would go walk. We would walk. It would probably be about, at that time, it was about a mile from our home, and we would walk in a hurry to get there. When we got there, of course, generally they would have church services in the beginning, and people are pulling in and getting out, you know, and you have the dinners. Everybody would bring food, you know, hams and chickens and cakes and pies and alcohol out of the trunk of the car, but everybody would share with the other one. And of course it was people that hadn't seen each other for a long time, the older ones. You'd celebrate the older ones, or they would acknowledge them from the stage. And then the young ones, of course, would be looking at girls looking at boys and boys looking at girls. You know, it was a place to meet. There were games, whether it was greasy pig, you know, who could catch that pig, or put some money up on top of a post, grease that post with lard, and then if you could climb it, you know, you could get up there and you could put dirt on you or whatever you wanted to do to try to get up there and get that, probably a dollar bill at that time. And ball games, balloons, candy, good singing. It was just a full day from morning till probably 6 o'clock in the evening. Just one full day of just fun, laughter, enjoyment. And then also, they would be discussing the politics of the day. For example, voting, who's running for office, even though they would be, at that time, all white. Who should we, as a people, get behind and vote for? And what was going on politically, whether it be have been maybe a race riot, or like in the 60s, I remember that's when a lot of the civil rights marches were going on down south, and you had like Schwerner and Cheney and Goodman that, you know, came up missing in Mississippi. So, you know, places you could go, warnings to young people about where to be, especially in the 60s. Kind of, in a way, reminds me of where we are right now politically, that you have to be a lot more aware of where you are, your surroundings, who you're around, what you say, what's being said. And so those would be conversations that would be going on as well. And so it was that one day per year that could get you rejuvenated, get you ready, excited to go back out and face tomorrow's work, which was at that time farm work for women, housework. You were cleaning houses. And this is in the 50s and in the 60s as well, cleaning houses, working in somebody's field, working in the orchards, working in the coal mines. It was always hot, dirty work. Very few of the power plants, none really. There were, power plants up and down the Ohio River, but very few to almost none were blacks that had those jobs. Even the local, there's a state facility in Gallipolis called the Gallipolis State Institute. In the 50s, the name has changed, politically correctness, 2 or 3 times, from Ohio Hospital for the Epileptics to Gallipolis State Institute. It's been like 3 different names, but it was for the mental retardation and those with major physical disabilities, but mental retardation. The only people, and there was just a handful of them, you could count them on one hand, they had hundreds of patients and probably almost hundreds of employees. But you could count the number of minorities that worked, blacks that worked on one hand. And every one of them worked in the coal room, in the furnace room. Not even direct care to the clients. Not even direct care. They worked in the furnace room. There were times when it was very segregated. Like I said, the women did day work, men were laborers working for someone, a farm. You actually would pass those jobs down in the 50s. I'm working for so-and-so, I've got another job. How would you like to have this job cleaning this house? The pay at that time was $5 a day. I lived in Bidwell, Ohio, which is probably about 6 miles from here. And I can remember my aunt and all the women that I knew, older women that I knew, the mothers, they would gather at the post office, the local post office. And they would, what I called, catch a ride to Gallipolis, the county seat, to do their various day work, iron for somebody, clean a house, babysit, those types of things. They generally made $5. Sometimes when they'd come back and you catch a ride for maybe somebody that did work at the Gallipolis State Institute or had a regular daily job, when they came to the post office, most people would go to there first, and they'd let you ride in Gallipolis with them. You go in, do your job, maybe your boss would pick you up on that corner, on a corner in Gallipolis, and take you onto their home. And then in the end of the day, they would take you back there, and then you would try to catch a ride out. I just can't even imagine that. But they did, I remember when they did it, but the insecurity of, what if I can't get a ride? And a lot of hand-me-down clothes, from those people that were wealthy, that could afford someone to clean their home and stuff. The clothes that their children had outgrown, they would pass down to them, their workers, and they would take them home to their children, which we were glad to get them. I think it's good and bad. Not bad, but good, and I liked it better then, because I think we may have taken more pride. Like, for example, we no longer have a queen contest. No longer have one. Wow. We could care less about being the Emancipation Queen. I guess, it was a big thing and it had its purpose in my day, but now, they could care less. We've moved on to vendors.
Moved on to vendors.
Vendors, as you can see, vendors here at the Emancipation, which is, it's good. On the one hand, it's kind of like brings shopping to you for jewelry and for various things. But the more we do of that, entertainment things, the less we know about history, I think. Now you can do both. There's history here. I always try to maintain it. There are a lot of people here that do, but you know, whatever shines and glitters and you know is the thing that gets the attention most. So I think we are drifting away from our history a lot. You know, it's for the emancipation. Why do we still do it? You know, this is 2017. You're still dragging, I'm still dragging around slave shackles and freedom papers and, you know, what is the purpose? But there's so much history here. Of course, I'm a history lover, but there's so much history here. It was right here along the Ohio River where the slaves crossed. It was right here along the river, up and down the rivers, where people were sold from, you know, whether it be Maryland, had taken them down south. Even that, some things will come to me like, I don't know whether you've ever heard the term sold down the river. So-and-so sold me down the river. You know, now I know what it means. Because the Ohio River, they really did. There were people that were trafficked down the river. And I think we have a rich history right here. The difficulties, even the terrain. You know, it's woody, it's hilly, so it was perfect for hiding and communities to start. And I don't know, it's just a rich history that I think so many people, they really need to know. And a lot of times when I go to places like Columbus, major cities, and they'll say, where are you from? Now we're talking Ohio, and I'll say, you know, Gallipolis area, and they'll say, oh, my grandmother, or my great-grandmother, or my uncle, or whatever. They came from there. And that might have been back in the 40s and the 50s and whatever. And it's just, there's just so much history here. A lot of those that have gone on to do great things, whether they were white and black. There's a big area on the Underground Railroad, so the importance of that seems like nationally now other places are really talking about the Underground Railroad. And now more than ever, talking about the Underground Railroad. And there's just so much history here. I know one of the churches here, one of the little black churches in the little community called Morgan, they had a black cemetery, and that's where all these slaves were set free in that area, just side of a hill, a mountain. And there's a marker in the grave that says, I think his name was just James, didn't even have a last name, just says James, whether that was the first name or the last name. And it said, set free by President Abraham Lincoln, and I think the Emancipation Proclamation. Now this is back in the 1800s, this marker. Mm-hmm. They've got pictures of it over there.
I need, because a minute ago I went over there.
Did you?
And I went up to the church.
Yeah, up on the hill?
Yeah, and went and
yeah.
They got a marker about Lambert.
Yeah, Lambert Land's a big
yeah.
one.